Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, good people. I want to start off by just saying I'm excited about our newest Patreon supporter. I've got to get a bell in the studio so I can ring it like they do on the other phone-a-thons. But I want to give a special shout out to Laura McNeil. Thank you so much for being a part of this team. You, along with others, many others, are helping us to continue to bring exciting, scintillating, insightful Black Like Me podcasts, not only to this country, but to the world, because we're being listened to and downloaded in 44 countries. So Laura, thank you. If you want to know how you can become a big supporter like Laura, just click the link below, find out how you can become a part of my Patreon team as well. And that does come with some benefits, and I'm sure that you would really enjoy being a part of that team. Hey, you know, I was recently at our city county building. It was a city council meeting, and a couple of things happened. One, there was a proclamation that acknowledged the 400 years of slavery that Black people, Black Americans endured, and just acknowledged the strength and the resilience of African American folks. I received a copy of that citation. That was very, very honoring. It was very wonderful. But also there was a discussion that we have declared racism as a health crisis. We now know through medical studies, through public health studies, that racism is now a social determinant of health in Black people and people of color. That means, like any other disease, we have to understand its root so that we can understand its cure. It opens up a lot of doors. But Madison made that big stand to say we're understanding that this is affecting people of color disproportionately, and we want to acknowledge that, draw that line in the sand so that we can begin to address these issues. So in light of that, I've put together a new series. I'm calling it Our Madison. And I'm looking at the things that have shaped our city and our city's history, particularly through the view of African American people. So I'm talking to trailblazers, history makers, folks who I consider my elders who were born in Madison, but also young people who are young enough to be my children who are born in Madison, who are giving us their perspective of this city as well. It'll be about 4 episodes that'll come out over the next few weeks. And listen, if you're from Madison, this is going to be a great journey for you. But if you're not from Madison, you're from a city that has had first also. So I want you to listen to both my love for my city, my passion for my city, my desire for my city to be equitable for all. So when I push on an issue, if I care enough to push on an issue, it's typically because I'm passionate about it. So I want you to listen to it and learn about my city, learn what Black elders and Black youngsters and young adults are saying about life in Madison. It's a beautiful place, great campus. It's the seat of state, county, and city government. But yet there's some invisible things that are impacting African Americans that are making us develop diseases, contract diseases, and die more quickly than our white counterparts. And so I just want you to hear through the stories of some great people in our community what has motivated them and what has made them sad. Then I want you to think about your own communities, because these folks live where you live also. Get to know them. Ask them their stories. Help to honor them and their contributions. And also ask them the hard questions. Is this the city you'd want your grandchildren to grow up in? So I just want you to just listen and learn, and I'm just certain that you're going to enjoy these next several episodes. Let me know what you think. So I'm really excited about having a person who's from my community, someone I've known my entire life, who's been a community activist, a leader, an educator, a community person, a leader inside his church, someone who raised his children just a few blocks from where I live. And we're going to be talking with him today. His name is Dr. Richard Harris. He's also an author. So we're going to talk a bit about his book and a bit about his life growing up here in Madison, Wisconsin. Dr. Harris, welcome to Black Like Me.
Thank you, Dr. G.
It's good to have you here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, listen, we like to lighten things up a little bit before we get into our discussions.
All right.
And so I have some questions that are called Black Icebreakers. And there's no right or wrong answer. I just like to just hear what folks think about about things. Listen, I want to let folks know who listen to the Black Icebreakers. When it's a younger group like millennials, I have to adjust the questions because there are things they don't know about. They don't know about Jerry curls and stuff like that. Dr. Harris is a contemporary of my mom, so I have to adjust him because, he's been grown my whole life. And so some of the things I might ask people my age, I'm going to ask him a little different questions just because he's been around, has seen a lot. But let me just ask you this. Growing up, Dr. Harris, did you prefer grits or cream of wheat?
I'll tell you, when I was growing up, I had never heard of cream of wheat.
That's right.
I just heard of grits.
Yes.
And I'm one of the few Black Madisonians.
Come on, say it.
I'm one of the few Black Madisonians that likes sugar
Dr.
and butter
Harris.
With my
That's what I'm talking
grits.
about.
I'm the only one, and my mother would just, she would mix gravy or eggs. But I wanted sugar and butter.
That's how I ate mine too. Did you get funny looks from people? Like when you tell them you eat butter on? Because people look at me like, oh, you poor misguided Black person.
Well,
you put butter and
actually,
sugar
when I
on
was
your
in the
grits.
Army, surprisingly, we had grits too. And the cooks, they would just look at me like I was crazy. But they would say, well, he's from Wisconsin, so he probably didn't know any better. But I've always liked the... and we have grits at Mount Zion Baptist Church after our 8 o'clock service. And I have... the same thing. So, but I'm one of a few.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm with you. And that's how my family grew up. Pig feet or pig ears?
I love them both. The thing about pig feet is you can really suck those bad boys, Pigtails are much smaller and they don't last long, but I love pig feet. I like the meat off the pig feet. And so that'd be my preference.
Let me ask you this: who cooked the pig feet? Who? Because I know you mentioned your dad was a gardener in your book.
Yes, my dad.
So did your mom do the bulk of the?
My mother did all the cooking, and my sister Georgia Henderson, who lives in Madison, she helped. And we had a saying. And of course, it wouldn't go over good now, but the women were always in the kitchen. They did the cooking. They cleaned the house. They washed dishes. After dinner, my dad and my brothers, we would all leave, and they would clean. I loved that part of it. Of course, it changed when I got married, but they did most of the cooking. She did very, very well.
I got you. Okay. You grew up on Madison's South Side. We'll get into that a little bit later, but one of the icebreakers. How did your parents control like your curfew? Would they say you had to be on that porch by the time the sunlight hit the trees, or
when the
you
street lights came on? I was just going to say, when I lived in South Madison, we didn't have street lights.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And it was extremely dark. And there was a fellow who lived about a block and a half from us. His name was Bill Bingham.
I remember that name.
Bill Bingham used to grow rattlesnakes. And it was we were outside of the city limits, so he had them in these glass cages, and you could hear those bad boys, rattling at night. Either that or crickets. But I rarely ventured out after say 8 o'clock. But we had to be at a certain time.
You had to be in by a certain time. All right, all right. Hey, did you talked about your sister Georgia? Did she ever get burned by a straightening comb? Do you remember your mom putting a straightening comb on a fire and straightening her hair? Was she ever burned by the straightening comb?
I don't remember my sister getting burned by a straightening comb, but I remember my mother using that straightening comb hot or no on my butt.
Oh,
she would. That was. My dad rarely whipped me. He was a church deacon, and if I did something wrong, he would point it out to me, and then we'd pray about it. And it was a good.
Sure.
But my mother, hers was grab that ironing cord and she loved that straightening comb. It could be hot or not, and she would
get you with the straightening comb.
Oh yeah. She left that. So I don't know what she did with my sister's hair, but I
you
know what she did with my butt. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. Let me see. I think I got one more for you. Do you know what cocoa butter is used for?
Well, when I was growing up, cocoa butter was used for people who had burns. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, when I was a teenager, a lot of the idols were people like Sugar Ray Robinson. Mm-hmm. And they loved hair. It was we would call it concholine. It was.
Oh, you're right.
You know, and so they would put cocoa butter. Some of the men would put cocoa butter and acid on their hair to make their hair be
Straight?
So
So it's kind of like a perm.
right. And
Did you ever do that?
no, I'm glad I didn't, because my barber told me that it would take your hair out, and he was sure right, because a lot of those fellows, when they about 20, 21, patches of their hair would come out because of that acid and that cocoa butter.
Yeah.
It was rough. So mine was nappy, and it's still nappy. It's a little white now, a little gray,
It looks
but
good. It looks good.
I don't have much to go with up there. I never have had good hair.
No, it looks like it looks good, Dr. Harris.
Well, thank you, but it isn't.
So listen, you grew up, your dad was a deacon at Mount Zion Baptist Church. You're a deacon
Yes.
at Mount Zion Baptist Church.
Yes.
When you used to walk or move while the preacher was moving, would you hold your index finger up in the air?
Yes, we would, but we would never move.
You would never.
I mean, if you had to go to the bathroom, I don't know, but it was extremely rough.
Yeah, because with your dad a deacon, you could make him look bad. But you saw people holding that
And
index
they would
finger
move.
up.
Yeah, I would see. Yeah, we sat all the way in the back, and as you notice, my left ear is longer than my right ear, because I would sit back there with some of the boys, and we would just laugh and joke, and these ushers would reach over and grab your ear and yank it. So that's why this one is longer than this one.
That means you were talking too much.
talking
in
too
church.
much. Yeah.
Oh man, this
Yeah.
is good. Let me see. I think I got one more for you, Dr. Harris. When you were growing up, my grandmother used to wear like a house coat that we called a duster. Did your mother or grandmother, aunts tell people what a duster is? I was trying to tell people in church on Sunday what a duster is.
Well, I don't know what a duster was, but my mother would wear something like that, covering her up. She
would have snaps down the front.
Snaps on the front.
And some ugly material.
Yeah, extremely ugly. And, I didn't pay much attention to my mother early in the morning until she fixed breakfast. I loved her breakfast, and then I'd really get into chatting with her.
Hey, Mama, how you doing? Where you come from?
Where you been? So I didn't pay much attention to her, at that time. One thing I remember about my mother, when I was going to, I went to Franklin School, and I had a chance to go to Franklin. I was at Franklin, and I had a chance to go to Central High School.
Sure.
At 7th grade. You could go either 7th, but you had to go there by no later than 9th. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go at 7th grade because I was playing sports with kids who were living in the bush, the Triangle area, and I'll get to that, at Longfellow and Washington. So I'd see these. So they were all going to Central High School in 7th and 8th grade. So I asked my mother if I could go. My dad said, yeah, you can go.
Sure.
But he didn't have the final say so. But my mother, she talked with some of the other women, especially those living on the east side, like Mrs. Hill and Betty Banks' mother, Mrs. Anna Mae Mitchell, and others, and they said, everyone called each other cousin when I was growing up.
Well, that's one of my questions about play cousins and stuff. So,
they would say, Cousin Willie Lou, I wouldn't let him go to Central at this time because those white girls are much too fast, and so you want to keep him away from white girls as long as you can. Because I wasn't allowed to date a white girl because my mother and dad had said that based on their experiences in the South,
sure,
a lot of black boys were murdered for just looking at a white woman.
A lot of us got that talk growing up in South Madison. We act like we didn't.
Yeah, so
we were told don't do that.
So I never did. In fact, when I was a junior at Central High School, I was voted the most bashful boy.
Really?
Yeah. So I asked, now the black girls, and I said, I was like an octopus. They didn't know where that came from. But with the white girls said that I was so bashful that I wouldn't talk to them. Well, the reason I wouldn't talk to them was because I knew that some other black girl would tell my mother, I saw Richard talking to a white girl. So,
and you get whooped with that.
And get whooped,
that hot comb.
So I just, but I was friendly to them.
Sure.
Spoke, but no. I always took black girls to the prom and dated black girls. And you got to remember back.
And you married a black woman.
And I married a black woman. She's from Louisiana. And you got to remember back in those days, black men were in the minority, if you can believe it, and because there was a Air Force, Truex Air Force Base had a number of black men. So the black men from Truex Air Force Base were competing with the black locals. So The girls at that time were outnumbered about 50-1, so they had the pick of the litter. So,
do you mind my asking what year you finished high school?
Sure. And I had to think. It was 1955.
All right, so that puts you at do you mind my asking, you're 82?
I'll be 82 in April 14th.
All right. So I want people to realize we're talking to someone who has great perspective, who grew up in Madison. So no, thank you for sharing that. I've always had this interest in talking with my elders growing up and just wanting to know about their life and their history. And one of the things I love about having my own podcast is that I can have people sit in the studio, record their thoughts, and have it out there for people to listen for years and years to come. So, Dr. Harris, to me, you're an anomaly. One, I grew up with your kids. I'm right between Victoria and Charles. So Victoria's a year older, Charles is a year younger. But you were born in Madison, so you're an 82-year-old, soon to be 82-year-old African-American man. You grew up on the South Side, which is where I grew up. You know, my mom still has her home there. My church is on the South Side of Madison. You've written an incredible book called Growing Up Black in South Madison. You came and participated in one of our Justified Anger history classes a few years ago, and it was a hit. People your books just sold like hotcakes, and then you're back this year, selling them. And so I just said to you a few weeks ago, Dr. Harris, I want you to come in my studio because, one, I want to glean from your wisdom. And there are a lot of new people who come to Madison who talk about what it's doing or what it's not doing. Yeah. But very few people have lived in Madison as long as you have, and then you still have a perspective. And so you tell the history in your book. I'm going to get to it in just a few minutes. But just for background, you were born in Madison in 1937. 37. And your mother came here from the South. She got in trouble, right? I'm not trying to tell all your family business, but
no, you're right. When my my mother lived in Americus, Georgia. It was Sumter County, Georgia.
That's where Habitat for Humanity is headquartered.
Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Jerry. President Carter is down there too.
President Carter's from there. Millard Fuller started it, and it was out of Americus.
Right, and so my mother's uncle shot a white man with a long pistol because they were arguing over a parking space for their horse and buggies. And this happened about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And my mother was on her way to Florida at 2 hours later, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, they had to get her family. She and her family had to leave. They left everything.
The house, everything. Clothes.
They moved to Florida, and then from Florida they came up north to. They got to Cincinnati, Ohio, Indianapolis. They came to Chicago and stayed for a day or two, and then came to Madison, Wisconsin, where my cousin, his name was Zach Trotter, was living, and they stayed with Zach. But when Bonaparte Man, that was my mother's uncle, when he shot that the white fellow, I mean, they had to get it. And back in those days, when white redneck racists lynched people, they lynched girls first, they'd rape them and just crucify them in front of the parents. And then they would rape. So they had to get her out. She was in school. She told me that
she had nothing to do with the murder, but because she was related to Mr. Bonaparte, she had to get up out of there.
3 hours later, they came and they left with their clothes in suitcases and bags.
Did the white man die?
No, just shot his arm off.
Okay,
but they shot him. So Bonaparte Man, he had to go west, and a group of Indians took him to parts of Texas where a group of Hispanic men, Mexican American men, took him, and he finally made his way up north too. But they couldn't come straight up because the police and everything were looking.
Sure.
So that's how he got here. So
your family escaped to Madison.
She escaped to Madison, and they stayed with my uncle, Mr. Trotter, on West Washington Avenue. And later, he opened up a tavern. It was Madison's first black-owned tavern.
What was the name of it?
Trotter's Tuxedo Lounge.
I've heard of Tuxedo Lounge, but I did not know that was your family. So they came here because you had family here. And that was in what year, Dr. Harris?
Well, I was born in 1937. I'm going to say it was probably about 1910, 1915 in that area.
So 1910, 1915, there was already a black population.
A very small
That's it.
population, yeah.
But like Mr. Trotter were entrepreneurs and owned businesses and things like this.
Yeah, let him stay over his tavern and
See, that's amazing
eventually
to me.
my parents they bought a lot of property that we still own out in South Madison.
About 8 parcels.
She bought, it was, well, actually it was more than that, but yeah, but I would say 8, and then they bought a house on Bram Street, and I was born in 1937, and I think they bought the house about 3 or 4 years before that. I'd say like 1933 or 1934, and I was born at Madison General Hospital. At first, they didn't, blacks could only stay in certain parts of the hospital.
Right.
And but I was born there, and then
They call it Meritor now.
They call it Meritor now.
Everybody
right?
who knows Madison is
Right,
Meritor, but it was General Hospital when I was a kid.
Yeah, Madison General Hospital. In fact, when I was born, I used to ask my mom and dad, my mother and father, what kind of a day was it? And it was in April 14th, and my dad said it was a beautiful sunshine, and he would say sunsplash day. I still use that term, sunsplash. And I asked my mother, and she said it was one of the worst days in Madison. It was windy, cold, rainy. Well, actually, they both were right. When they went to the hospital, it was sunshine, 10 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't born until about midnight, and it was rainy, windy. So
they remember different parts of the day.
And my mother said, she told my father, she called him Mr. Harris. She said, this is the last child. My dad said my head was as big as a basketball. In fact, my dad asked, how did he have this birth? He asked the nurse, he said, look how big his head is. And so he used to call me, that's why he used to call me old big-headed boy. But a lot of people call their kids old big-headed boys. So it didn't bother me. But he really meant it with me.
So Dr. Harris, what used to be Madison General Hospital is Meritor now.
Right.
But it's in an area that historically is known as the Bush. Or the Triangle. People listen to this podcast all over the world, but for folks who are somewhat familiar with Madison or even the term, they're not really sure what it means. Can you just take a minute and tell us what the Bush was and who lived there? Mm-hmm. This is a big part of Madison's South Side history.
And it's in my book.
Yes.
The subtitle of my book is called Economic Disenfranchisement of Madison, because that's Madison's legacy, as far as I'm concerned, with racism, is how blacks have been cheated and economically disenfranchised, and this was a perfect example of it.
Tell me about it. I want your perspective.
It's an area that bordered
be as angry as you want.
Yeah, it was. I cry sometimes. I think I had a lot of relatives, a lot of friends, both black and white. Mm-hmm. It was an area bordered by Park Street, Regent Street, and West Washington Avenue. It was a triangle.
So it's right where we go for coffee sometimes at Panera's Town.
Right, it was a triangle there. And a number of black families lived there, Italian families, Jewish, other families. One thing is they were working poor. They all worked. Mm-hmm. And it was a very nice, homogeneous neighborhood. People got along with each other. And it was the only thing that was wrong with it, as far as the city's fathers were concerned, was that, well, two things. One, it was full of low-income, poor people. And the other was they considered it an eyesore when you drove up to Madison, West Washington Avenue to the state capitol. You had to go through that area.
Right, you sure did.
And so they thought that was deplorable.
So I'm sorry, Dr. Harris. So it was black, Jewish, and Italian.
Yeah.
So it's
and other whites.
So it's harmonious, not so much homogenous, but it was harmonious.
Yes, it was.
Got you. So people didn't like driving up West Wash. Because you'd
see those people. You'd see Italians. You'd see blacks and.
So kind of where Bayview is right now. That's
right,
part of the area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they would drive up West Wash and
they didn't like that, and so they asked for federal funds. Now I found out about this. This occurred in about I'm going to say starting in around 1953. Mm-hmm. I really didn't get aware of it until I'd gone into the service and got out of the service. So I didn't really get into it until about 1956, 1957.
Sure. So you came back to Madison after the service.
After the service, yes. And what they did,
the city government?
The city of Madison was called the Madison Urban Renewal, Madison Redevelopment Authority, MRA.
Okay.
And they used federal funds to urban renewal, under our urban renewal program, these people. And they were treated like dogs. The city did have what they call relocation workers, and they were supposed to help people find other homes, what have you. Now, I can't think of any black person who had help from a relocation worker. Now, some of the white families did. But what they did is that they would offer the apartment owners or the homeowners about a tenth of what the property value really was.
Wow.
And say, take it or leave it. Now, most of those people didn't have the wherewithal to get attorneys. Attorneys were expensive back in the days anyway. And what attorney wants to take on the city of Madison's urban renewal?
Exactly.
And so they would argue, but they would get as much as they can. And the Italian and the Jewish and the other white families, at least they could go to other areas in the city of Madison. Black families could not. There were what they call covenants.
Sherwood had one, Tacoma, that said if you're black, you can't live here.
Yeah, all over the city, they had these covenants saying
Wow.
no colored, that's how they referred to it, allowed. So the only place that black families could go was in South Madison. And a lot of black families did go. And I in my book, I describe one family, and it brings tears to my eyes when I think about them. The family's name was Wiley, Gus Wiley and Mary Jo Wiley.
Mm-hmm.
They bought a 2-flat on Milton Street, I think, he got discharged from the Army in, I think, 1946 or 1947. So he used some VA money to buy this 2-flat. They lived in the basement and then rented the top 2 floors to university students. And if they probably bought the property in about 1946, and I talked to Mrs. Wiley, and she said that they paid it off because they also worked at the University Hospital as aides and orderlies. They paid off that note in a 20-year note. They paid off in about 10 years.
Wow.
So it was free and clear.
Sure.
Along comes the city and offers them about a tenth of what it was worth. Even offered them less than they paid.
Wow.
And Mr. Wiley, he fought it. Bless his heart, he had a stroke, and he died, and I don't know where he. And then I remember Mrs. Wiley coming to Mount Zion Baptist Church, and I remember she just fell on the floor in front of everybody in the pulpit, and she said, "These white people are cheating me. I need help."
Wow. And
she would cry, and it was so sad. Well, the Reverend at that time was Reverend Washington. He did the best he could, but they just ignored him. And so they, and the other thing is when a lot of blacks didn't even know that the property was being sold. The apartment owners didn't tell them. So on the day that they were supposed to be moving out and they were going to tear down the buildings, up comes these demolition crews, and these people, they gave them an hour to get. Now, if you can imagine this, you got a radio, maybe not televisions back in them days, but a dishwasher, washer,
dryer.
Yeah. And you try to put that in the back seat of your car. You couldn't put your clothes, everything in the back seat and trunks of a car. And then my cousin was telling me she heard these white guys singing "Bye Bye Blackbird," and it was just horrific.
They give them an hour to move out of their homes.
They were there at 8. They were there at 8 and said, "We'll give you an hour to get your stuff out of here."
Nowhere to go.
No, so
no U-Haul rented.
Nope. So they go out to South Madison, and they would stay with friends and relatives and what have you until they could find a decent place. So when I think of economic disenfranchisement,
right,
that was probably the biggest one, where black people were cheated economically. Never got that money back. I asked the mayor once about reparations, and then someone from the city said, well, it would be difficult because you can't find the relatives, and then there might be open to lawsuits and what have you. So there will be no reparation for those people, unfortunately. But that was really a clear cut of racism, which is the core of Madison, which is Madison's legacy, how they treated those people, and how they went out to South Madison and tried to make it. And when I drive down that way now, and the other thing is they promised these families, they said, listen, if you don't want to move, you can stay here. We'll build little small homes for you, and you can have your gardens. And so they lied. So a lot of people left with the expectations that they could come back. And so the city
they
knew
never brought them back.
And what really bothers me is that the fellow who was heading up the MRA, Madison Redevelopment Authority, they had to fire him because he was doing some crooked shenanigan things himself.
Watch it, Deacon. Watch it now. Watch that shenanigans now.
So
you can cuss on this podcast.
Okay, yeah. So here's this guy who was a crook running the MRA. Well, anyway, the city of Madison, that's a stain on the city of Madison.
Who was the mayor during that time? Do you remember?
I don't know who the mayor was.
We could do some search. I was curious.
I don't even know if they had. At one time, Madison used to have. They were like city managers.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if they had a city manager back then.
Sort of like the town of Madison has a city administrator, a town chair, or something like that.
Right. So,
but then that has an impact on, say, like your uncle's business, like the Tuxedo Tavern or Club. That was on West Wash.
West Washington Avenue.
That's where it was.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Were your uncle's patrons just black? Did some of the Jewish and Italian folks come into?
Well, when he was on West Washington Avenue, there would be Italians who would come in. Very few Jewish people, but he would have Italian customers.
And black customers?
And black customers, yeah.
See, so even back in those days, in the early teens, black people were running businesses. Sometimes we think this is an anomaly. We're fighting to actually get black businesses to open up black jazz clubs and bars now.
I'm glad that you mentioned that.
100 years ago, we had one.
And in my book, I explain this. When I was growing up, we had a black laundry man. His name was Talio Ferro. It was called Tally's Laundry. We had two blacks.
I went to school with his kids or grandkids, Charlene Taliaferro.
Mm-hmm.
And
there were two blacks who owned dry cleaning plants. One was a man named James Braxton. His grandson, Tyrone, played for the Denver Broncos.
I went to school with Tyrone. I went to middle school with Tyrone.
That was his grandfather. And my brother Donald Harris had the other dry cleaning plant. We had three nice restaurants.
Well, I'm sorry. Where were the dry cleaning plants?
Well, my brother's dry cleaning plant was somewhere on West Washington Avenue, and I think Mr. Braxton's was over on Williamson Street in that area.
So West Washington was more of a busy thoroughfare than, say, Park Street at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay, so your uncle Donald, you said?
My brother
one?
Donald.
Your brother Donald, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And then you said restaurants?
We had a restaurant that was owned by the Millers,
mm-hmm.
and it was called the Chicken Shack.
Mm.
And because black people weren't served at other restaurants.
Right.
So the Chicken Shack was open from Tuesday night through Sunday night.
Okay.
And it was packed because there was the one place and the chicken was great, and they had greens, cobbler pie, the whole 9 yards. And you were with your own, and
right,
you could,
right.
And then the other was another restaurant, and it was I forgot the name of it, but it was on the east side, and they also, I think it was run by the Miller family. So we had two black restaurants. We had a man who repaired cars. His name was Mr. Curly Seals, mm-hmm. and he worked for a company called Pyramid Motors. They sold automobiles, but he also did car work in the evenings and on weekends.
Sure.
So he'd repair all your cars. So for the most part, black people just serve, and because of race discrimination, you had to go to black restaurants, black dry cleaners, black cleaners, black churches.
But we had a large enough black community, and we had black businesses to take care of black communities. So restaurants, dry cleaners, barbershops, beauty
mm-hmm.
shops. it's hard to even find those now, Dr. Harris, for us. And the black community has just blown up. But our kids grew up not knowing this history. That's actually why I love your book. That's why I want to help you sell it.
Thank you.
That's why I want to help. That's why I want to keep asking you more questions about it, because kids growing up who have not seen black restaurants, I think there might be one or two right now. There's one that's called the Anointed.
Yeah.
And then of course there's McGee's, which is on the south side on Park Street. But
we should have many
right.
with the number of
7
people.
years ago they didn't even exist.
No.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/BlackLikeMe and help us take the show to another level.
The other thing that I recall about racism and discrimination in Madison, and it occurred to me personally.
Sure.
We had a black football player. His name was Eddie Withers.
Sure.
And he was an All-American. In fact, I think he was the first black All-American from the University of Wisconsin football team.
And had he grown up in Madison?
Yeah, he went to Central High School, my school. And Eddie Withers would talk to us every Monday. I used to go down to the neighborhood house on West Washington Avenue, and we want to talk football, or could he get us some free tickets? And he would just talk about school studies.
Wow.
But you know, to us, he was like Jackie Robinson of baseball.
Right, he's from Madison.
From Madison, and an All-American. And so I appreciated that. But I'm saying this, Eddie Withers graduated. He was an All-American, graduated from the University of Wisconsin. I think he played 1 year with the Green Bay Packers. And when he came back to Madison, I remember my high school football coach, he said, "Richie, you're going to be happy." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Eddie Withers is going to join our coaching staff." I said, "Get out of here." He said, "Yes." So I told my cousin, I told a guy named Lori Doss and all the other blacks, I said,
Sure.
We called ourselves colored back in them days. I said, "We are going to have a colored assistant coach." And they didn't believe me, so they went. He said, "Yeah, Eddie Withers is going to start next year." Well, Eddie Withers came to our practice just once, and he didn't come the next day. So we asked what happened.
Right.
The principal, to be a coach, you had to be a teacher with the public schools, and they wouldn't hire him. Superintendent said, "I will never allow a colored person to teach my children in the public schools. They're unfit." So Eddie Withers coached us one day, and he went to Milwaukee, bless his heart,
and brought some math teacher in to be the coach.
Yeah, and he coached the football team down. I think it was Milwaukee North Division or whatever, and they won the city title, 3 or 4 years. But he died of a heart attack in Madison. I felt bad for him. He really wanted to coach at his high school.
At his alma mater, but
they wouldn't let him. The other person I know her name was Dolores Green. She applied for. Now she's a sister of. She wrote this book called Settling. She's gonna kill me. Anyway, Dolores applied for. Dolores.
She applied for a job where?
With the Madison Public Schools, and they tore the application up in front of her.
Right in front of her.
Right in front of her. James Green applied for a job at the police department, and he was an alcoholic, and he was smelling like liquor, and he said, "I ain't having no ends working for me." So in 1961, when I graduated, this is my personal experience of racism. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin.
Is this when you applied for a job at the county?
Yes.
Yo, tell her. I love that story. I was going to get to that, please.
Well, I graduated in 1961 in May or June. I forgot. It was in that time. And my wife and I, who was deceased, she was from Louisiana.
Sure.
We had planned on getting married in August of 1961. And she liked Madison, so we were just saying stay in Madison. So in May, at that time, and I don't know if the UW has it now, but at that time they had like a job placement office.
Sure, they did when I graduated.
Okay.
Career advising,
right.
and something like that.
So I went to, and she was very nice, and she made some appointments for me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I took an exam at the state social service exam. I scored like 92 in it. She said, "Oh, there's a lot of openings in Madison." I said, "Well, my wife and I would like to stay in Madison." So she made me 2 appointments.
Sure.
One was with the county, and one was with the city, and they were like social worker aides or social something aides. Well, when I went to and I don't know, I forgot where that state position was. When I went there, this lady, she kind of reminded me of Maggie Pearl. You heard of her, Maggie Pearl? That really dates me. She used to be in a program with the Grand Ole Opry. It was just on radio.
Oh, Minnie Pearl? Oh, good. That's a different one.
Yeah, it was Minnie Pearl.
The one who used to wear the tags on her
Right,
hats?
yeah.
Yeah, Minnie Pearl. She was on Hee Haw also.
Oh, she was? Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's what she reminded me of when I walked in.
Uh-huh.
She didn't look up at me at all. And so finally I said, hello. And then she looked up. She said, yeah, what do you want? And I said, I gave her my card. And she said, So she called another white woman out and from another office, and she said, what do you want? And I said, well, I was sitting here by the UW job placement office, and I gave her the card. She said, damn, just what she said.
Wow.
So never asked me to have a seat. So she went back in her room, her office, and about 10 minutes later, in comes a Dane County sheriff. And he was a big bruiser. He looked like he was about 6'6", bald head with his hat barely fit his big head,
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me, and then he walked in her office. So then they both came out, and she tore the card up and threw it in the trash. She said, I'll tell you this, they made a tremendous mistake. I would never think of hiring a colored person over here. She pointed her finger at me. She said, my staff wouldn't go for it, and our clients wouldn't go for it. And he's going to show you out. Wow. Off the grounds. So he walked me to my car. He got in his car, and he followed me until I drove off the grounds. Well, I went to the city job, and this lady was like some trailer park person. She's just chewing gum. And I looked at her, and she said, what do you want? I gave her my card, and she said, now she didn't even say, she just said, I'm not going to have anyone talk to you. She said, we wouldn't hire colored people. I don't know why they did this. So I went back to the job that afternoon.
This is Madison, people. This is not Mississippi. This is not Atlanta. This is not.
I went to.
Madison.
So she said, let's look at some different places where there are more people of colors. So we chose Chicago, Illinois, and she made in that space of time 3 interviews for me the next Monday in Chicago. One, and I'll never forget it. The first one was with the Cook County Hospital as a social work. It's called the Stoger, Stoger Hospital now. It's down at the corner of Eden's Expressway, the Eisenhower Expressway, and the Kennedy. It's huge. In fact, it took me an hour to find where I was going. I had to talk to security, and back in those days, they didn't have telephones, so they couldn't.
Sure.
So he finally walked me, and I said, my gosh. Well, I sat down, and I talked to her, and I really liked, and she offered me, after we talked for about an hour, she offered me a job. She said, I want you to give me a copy of your diploma, and I want a recommendation from your advisor.
Sure.
I said, I can get that for you. But I didn't take it. I said, I was considering. I said, I had 2 other interviews. The next one was I think it was on Damon Avenue in Chicago. I lived in Chicago about 8 years, and I don't remember much like I used to, but I think Damon, if that's the street, and it was the Cook County Department of Public Aid. And I was there for about an hour talking to her, and the thing that overwhelmed me is that she said, you're going to have to do a lot of traveling, and your caseload is going to, we are short social workers, and the caseload is and I'm not going to be able to give you a break because even though that kind of frightened me. But she said, if you're interested, let me know. You have to join the You got to join the Democratic Party. Mayor Daley, that was his party, you know. So you had to join the Democrats
To get a job as a social worker.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
That's a whole nother level of wow.
So, yeah, that was the machine. That's what they call it, the machine.
That was the Daily Machine.
And I said, okay. And the third job was at the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club. So I finally found my way to Hyde Park. And I kind of liked Hyde Park. It reminded me of Madison a little bit. I went to the neighborhood club and I spoke to her, and I'll never forget it. Her name was Mrs. Norma Pendleton. And she was a beautiful black woman. I was so struck. I could hardly answer my question. I just looked at her. So she said, "Do you want a glass of water? Are you tired?" I said, "No, I didn't tell her. I was just overwhelmed by her."
I just want to look at you.
Yeah, right. Here I'm getting married 3 months later. But it had nothing to do with that. But we talked, and she offered me a position, and I took her position. And I was at the Hyde Park Neighborhood Club. I was hired as a detached gang worker, street worker. And everyone teases me because they were saying, was I working with prostitutes and streetwalkers? And I said, no. At that time, Chicago was beginning to have a gang problem. So I was working with young boys between the ages of maybe 11 and about 16, trying to deter them from getting into a gang. There was a gang down there called the Blackstone Rangers. And they wanted me to, and I wasn't the only one. They must have had 100 of these kinds of
I heard of that gang when I lived there.
And so I was hired and I took that job, and I called the other two people the next day.
To let them
But
know.
the thing about it is, there was, I told my wife there was things that I remembered about that. First of all, the people who interviewed me were black. Mm-hmm. And the people who interviewed me offered me positions. So
They were black also.
they were also black. So my wife said, most people came from the South to the North to get a job. Mm-hmm. You had to go south to get a job. I had to go from Madison, Wisconsin
to Chicago.
But the story doesn't end then. It doesn't end there because that happened in May or June of 61. And I would say in January of 62, I was sitting at my desk at Hyde Park, and I had gotten a letter. Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't know if we had a Madison manager or a City of Madison mayor. But I got a letter from that office, and it said, "Mr. Harris, we heard of what happened to you 5 or 6 months ago. We'd like to consider offering you that position. Would you reconsider it and come back? It was come back to Madison." Mm-hmm. And they called me several times in my office, and I finally spoke to them, and I said, "Listen, I want you to listen carefully." So I took that letter I had on my desk, and I tore it up. I said, "Now, can you hear that?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "That's my answer." I said, "I'm never coming back to Madison." Well, never say never. Because 8 years later, I moved back to Madison.
After getting your master's degree in Chicago.
My master's degree.
You got an MSW, right?
Yeah, right. MSW.
Master's in social work.
You're right. I applied for the University of Chicago, but it was so expensive. And so I went to the University of Illinois. It was called the Jane Addams Graduate School of Social Work. Mm-hmm. Best experience I've ever had. The fieldwork assignments, and that's how I got into education. I didn't know social workers were working in educational settings. And my assignment, I was in a school of social work, but I was assigned to work in the public schools. Mm-hmm. And I remember the public schools I would refer to work to was Ray Elementary School in Hyde Park. You mentioned Murray. Someone mentioned, I think I had Murray Elementary.
I mentioned Kenwood, which is where my wife went,
right.
And she went to a middle school called Lewis Worth.
And I went to Hyde Park High School. Mm-hmm. And
that's part of my recruiting territory.
That's where the Mayor Soglin is from Hyde Park, I believe. Anyway, I was working with, and I had the experience of working as a detached worker with these kids. So I really enjoyed what I saw educators doing in the school system in Chicago, Illinois. Mm-hmm. Those were some dedicated teachers. They were all black. And I mean, they looked after those kids. The problem that I see with the Madison public schools is, and I'm getting to that, is I see two things wrong with the Madison public schools. I don't see enough black people teaching or doing anything. That's
Amen.
And the other is I don't see that dedication between a white teacher and a 7th grade black boy. They're missing.
There's a disconnect.
There's a tremendous disconnect. And these kids are coming to school with basically from a situation where they have heard how horrific and racist white people are. I mean, the brothers and sisters are saying, I can't get a job, and I'm going to get into the job thing too. But anyway, I saw with those teachers in the public schools in Chicago a great deal of dedication. And I like that. And then I was, I would have to make home visits. And it disturbed me if I'd go into a home and I talked to a mother or father. And by the way, I was surprised at the difference now than then. Most of the black children that I worked with were from 2-parent homes.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And there was one boy, his name was Freddie Harris. I hope I don't disturb Freddie, but anyway, I visited his home, and Freddie would never come to school. He would leave, but he wouldn't get to school. He would leave his house.
And not come to school.
And so I would say, Freddie, what is wrong with you? He said, well, I like to watch Ernie Banks and the Chicago Cubs play. This guy was going up to Wrigley Field up there in Sheffield. I don't know how he got up there. And Foster and David, he was taking a bus up to watch Ernie Banks and those guys playing baseball. And I said, you have to go to school, Freddie. I love baseball and I love Ernie Banks. I said, that's not
a diploma.
No. But he wasn't a bad kid.
He liked baseball.
Yeah. So Madison Public Schools decided to close schools in South Madison, which would have impacted. Now back in that time, it was primarily just black children, black families going to Franklin and Lincoln schools.
Right. I met your daughter. I met your kids at Lincoln.
Right. And the theory was black children weren't doing academically, so the school board said, well, we're going to close the schools in South Madison and bus the black children to white schools, predominantly white schools, so that the black children can learn through a process of osmosis where the broad thinking of the minds of expansive white children would go over and transfer into the minds of black children. And I said, I don't know where you got that theory from. It's so racist. But anyway, they just said black children can't learn with black children.
Right.
So we might as well just tear these schools. What they really wanted to do was turn that area over to developers and do just like they did in the Triangle area. Tear all that area down.
Do that in South Madison.
So you wouldn't have had any schools. And every time I go by Lincoln, I think about that. Anyway, a woman named Sandy Solberg, who was white, who called me and she said, Dr. Harris, you're not going to believe this. Well, I didn't. She said that Madison Public Schools is withholding all of its funds to keep those schools open, and that they're going to close them. Well, she was right. So I talked to a friend of mine by the name of Kwame Salter. Mr. Salter was a member of the board, and he was black. He's the only black, and he was the only person with integrity on that. And he said, yeah, Richard, that's what they're doing. And he said, I'm glad you're getting into this. I'm having a hard time. He said, these rednecks are really, they're going, and they were going full tilt. Well, we had to go to the Office of Civil Rights in Chicago, which is a federal agency out of D.C., initiated a race discrimination complaint in 1978. And in 1981, they ruled in our favor, and the schools were kept open.
So Lincoln ended up becoming an elementary school.
Yes.
I went to it from 74 to 77 when
it
it
was
was
probably a middle school then, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jack Moore was our principal.
Right.
But during that time, they were trying to close it and Franklin down altogether.
Yes.
Wow. Now, as this is just a bit of trivia, but Kwame Salter, who was the head of the school board, his granddaughter stars on the show Blackish. She's actually got her own spinoff, which I think is called Grownish.
Okay.
But that's Kwame Salter's granddaughter.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's his daughter, Carrie's daughter.
Well, Kwame Salter, wherever you are, I think he lives in Lake Forest, Illinois.
Yes, I think somewhere in Illinois.
And wherever you are, thank you. And every time I see him, I say thank you. Because as the only black person, there's a lot of pressure put on him.
That's how that got stopped.
And he helped us a lot. He gave us a lot of information, and I'm so helpful, thankful. And it's what Kwame did. But
that's why we need more black and brown people on that school board.
On the school board, right? Yes, you do. So remember that. I don't want to plug anybody, but anyway, those are the issues of racism. And so when I'm going to end with this. If I
Sure. Now I got a couple more questions for you.
Okay. I always have people ask me, Dr. Harris, what is Madison's legacy as you see it? I say Madison's legacy is white racism from my perspective. It's an extremely racist community. Now, I'll preface that by saying this. I would say about 80% of the white people I know in this city are good people. I think they want to do the right thing.
Sure.
I think we got about 10 or 20% who are as racist to the core. And unfortunately, these are the people who make hiring decisions.
Sure.
These are the people who make decisions as to whether you're going to get a bank loan for a mortgage for a house. These are the people that make decisions which impact on black people. And
legal decisions, law enforcement decisions, judicial decisions.
Right. And until, that's why I like your program. I watch your program. Most of the people that came into your classes are white.
It's designed for them.
Right. White people need to charge other white people with their racism. Right. It doesn't do any good for me to, because they just say, well, he's going to. But when another white person says, hey, you're racist, you know what? So I like what you're doing, and so keep that up. And I mentioned that in my book. I say,
yes, I saw that.
So I do think that the racism is so pervasive in this city. I mentioned to one of the mayors a long time ago, I said, what we need in Madison is an affirmative action plan, a voluntary affirmative action plan, where you take the top 100 firms in this city and you take a look at, this would be a good dissertation paper for someone, or a good article, and newspaper person could do it. Take a look at the top 100 companies or firms in Madison. How many black presidents of these or CEOs do you have? Probably about, at best, 2 or 3.
At best.
How many managers? How many main supervisors?
Sure.
How many professional people? All the way up down the line. And so what I suggest that they do is have an affirmative action plan for the top 100 businesses in this city, where they hire black people at the percentage of black people in Madison. So if the percentage of black people in Madison is, let's say, 20%, I don't know what it is.
Sure. 20%
of those employees should be black at your place. They shouldn't be all lily white. And the people who make the hiring decisions, they know what they're doing, and they are not going to hire a black person. And so when blacks don't get hired for jobs and they come back to home and they start complaining about the GD white man, their children and younger brothers and sisters, they hear that, and they say white people are bad. So when they come into school the next day and a white teacher says something, they're saying F you because of the racism. So racism, Madison's legacy, and I don't really see it. People have asked me, and they want me to say, do you think?
Don't stop. Keep saying. Give me just 1 minute. Keep saying that.
They want to say, do you see anything positive about Madison? And I have to say, I don't. And I'd like to say yes, but I don't. And I don't know what the future of this city is when it comes to its dealing with racism, economics, job equity, job equality, employment. Blacks don't want anything higher. They want to be treated fairly when it comes to employment, and they're not. And it's a tragedy. And I don't see it getting any. Now, the 80% who I know are good people have got to take it upon themselves, these are white people, to deal with those 20% and say, look, either you change your attitude about not hiring black people, or we're going to fire you, and we're going to put somebody in there who can come up with an affirmative action plan. So it would be a voluntary affirmative action plan, and the mayor would recognize those businesses after a year who would show some progress in hiring blacks as administrators, supervisors, managers, members of the board. I bet you, I don't know how many boards have blacks on them. And so this is not just, and it bothers me when people say, well, we will donate X number of dollars to the Urban League or to the NAACP, and they think by donating that money, they're free to be racist as they want to be. I don't mind them donating money, but you also have to deal with that racism. And so I was saying that these 80% whites, who I think are good people, have got to take it upon themselves to deal with those 20% racist people who refuse to hire black people, who refuse to approve loans for blacks.
They've got to challenge their own folks.
I don't know how many business bankers I've talked to who have admitted to me that there's a double standard when it comes to that black applicants for loans
for businesses for commercial property.
Right. They have to be like the Jackie Robinsons of baseball.
Exactly. I've seen people be turned down right on the South Side of Madison.
Oh yeah.
And then go to the First Bank across Plains and buy up a whole lot.
So the racism. So they say, well, do you see? And when white people say, do you see any improvement? Unfortunately, I have to say, Dr. G, no.
That's one of the questions I have for you.
I don't see any improvement in Madison until Madison deals with that employment, racial, economic. And so that's why the subtitle of my book, Economic Disenfranchisement.
So that makes me want to ask you three more questions, if I could do this.
Sure, yeah.
Because I know
go ahead, sure.
I'm enjoying this.
All right.
Because not only do you bring a great historical perspective, a personal historical perspective, Dr. Harris, you're an incredible storyteller.
Thank you.
Seriously. And so we need to capture more of this because there are very few of our elders in this community who have the wherewithal, the ability, the information to do what you do. So I'm going to want you to come back to talk some more.
Sure, I'd love to.
But let me ask you one. I'll just say as a statement, to listen to you and your experiences, families being forced to move out of the triangle, all those things that are happening. I'll just say, you don't have to say it, but I will say it's disheartening in some of the mayoral debates to hear that there's no racist problem, to actually hear one of the candidates say there's no racist problem because they've not gone away. So I guess the couple questions I want to ask you is, one is, there are people that are stating that there's no black middle class, which is crazy. You're middle class, I'm middle class.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
We know that this disenfranchisement took place, but I want to ask you, how do you think that impacts black economics today? The impact of that destruction happened to the Triangle and other places. Yeah. How's that impacting us? Because your brothers own construction companies and stuff.
My brothers own construction companies.
There's no black construction company in Madison.
No black construction companies. In answer to your question, it's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
I have the Harris family, we have a large number of relatives.
Sure. I grew up with a lot of them.
Nephews, nieces, the children of these cousins, nephews, and nieces, all over South Madison and the West Side. In fact, I don't know. I know very few of them, but I know. But what bothers me is when I do see them, or if they'll send me a card that they're graduating from college, and what bothers me is they'll say, "Uncle Rich," I said, "What are you going to do when you graduate from Whitewater?" Or they say, "Well, Uncle Rich, I'm going to move to Atlanta. I'm moving to Houston."
It's that black brain drain we've been talking about. People don't believe me.
I'm going to move to Chicago.
And why do they want to leave Madison?
And I'll say, "Why don't you stay here?" Because you and I both know I'll never get a job here. It's impossible. Now this is in the year 2019, and these are young. And when I talk to black graduates from the University of Wisconsin, who I'll say they can't. I mean, graduation is probably Saturday, June 7th, and they're on a plane out of here Sunday, June the 8th. So it would seem to me that both mayoral candidates are dead wrong if they're saying there is no racism, especially in the economic areas. So my family is moving to Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi. One of my cousins is going to work at a hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. I can't believe it.
I'm looking at property in Mississippi right now. Honestly, for retirement.
She said,
partial retirement.
I got the job, and I didn't get one here in Madison.
We hear that all the time. Black people with master's degrees who can't find jobs. And people keep saying we want people to come here. But if we're going to become a world-class city that's worthy of the honors that we get, we have to stop saying that we do not have a racist problem because we do.
Birmingham, we're right. Birmingham, Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama. I asked one of my cousins, I said, what are you going to do? I never heard of Huntsville, Alabama. He said, well, I'm involved in rocketry. Well, good. I'm glad that Huntsville, Alabama.
North Carolina, Texas.
Charlotte, North. Yeah.
People are leaving Madison.
They're just leaving Madison because, and these, now my nephews and what have you, they're all between the ages of maybe 18 and 30.
Sure.
And, Uncle Rich, there's no future in Madison. White people have got this town sold up, and they don't mind telling you, we ain't hiring black people. So your best bet is to, and so that's what they're saying. So Madison, that 20% that does the hiring,
somebody's got to get to them.
Somebody's got to get to them. And don't give the NAACP $500 and say we've done it.
Right.
And I appreciate that.
But it takes more than that.
It takes white people to deal with white people and get that 20%, and they know who they are. I don't know how many people I talk to at the university or the schools, and they'll say, "Well, we know so," and I say, "Why don't you do something about it?" Well, what good will it do?
And people just keep quiet.
Keep quiet.
Let me ask you one more question. Miss Maxine, Miss Harris, your wife, who I've known my entire life as well, passed away in the last year.
In June.
In June of last year. Do you think you made a mistake? Do you regret that the two of you raised your children in Madison, looking back?
Well,
that's my last question for you.
That's a very good question. When we got married, Maxine came up from Louisiana. She was born in Southwest Louisiana, down there. She experienced a lot of discrimination down there in Southwest Louisiana, and she liked Madison.
Right.
But when we got to Chicago, she liked Chicago even better. There was many more things to do. But what bothered her was she didn't think we had the wherewithal to raise our children, because I would come home and tell her what I was seeing in the schools, and there was a lot of problems, and she would hear about the Blackstone Rangers and the Egyptian Cobras and all these gangs, and so that when I told her I was moving back to Madison, she agreed. She said, because she had said I want to go back. So,
because she thought it would be better for your children in the schools.
So, what was your question again?
Do you regret as a person who's born in Madison and you raised your children? I mean, you got your undergraduate degree here. You went to the University of Illinois to get your master's. You got your PhD in educational leadership.
Educational administration.
That's right. You got your PhD in educational administration
from UW here.
From UW-Madison. And because there are benefits. And I guess I'm just wondering, are there any regrets you have for having raised your children here? Because these are questions I'm going to have to ask. My daughter is now going into grad school here at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But it's a question I'm going to have to ask myself in a few years.
I think that we made a mistake in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
I think we made a mistake coming back to Madison.
And that breaks my heart.
When I see the things that and I'm still in contact with some friends of mine who I went to graduate school.
Sure.
And I find, one of my favorite friends down there, her granddaughter is working with a black TV station. I think it's Channel 7, I think it's WLS.
WLS Channel 7, ABC affiliate.
And I think we had made a big mistake. I think there have been more opportunities.
Sure.
And they wouldn't have faced. And now Chicago is a racist city.
Sure. It's got its own
segregation. No doubt. It's got its own discrimination. But the level of racism in Madison far outweighs.
See, now that makes people just think, no, not Madison. It's a liberal town. It's a college town.
Far outweighs the discrimination in Milwaukee and in.
And people in the South say that too. They say what they experience in Madison is different. And you and I know we both have earned our anger, Dr. Harris. And but we also want Madison to be better. And we're not saying it's just bash the city, but you and I both want it to be better. But if you're sick and no one ever diagnosed that you've got bronchitis, then they may treat you for a minor cough. So we're just trying to help Madison diagnose his issues, America diagnose his issues, so that it can change its ways.
Right.
But I also hear you saying loudly and clearly that that's not the responsibility of black folks. We can tell our experiences, but white people, the 80%, good folks have got to talk to the 20%, put pressure on them,
Right.
so that this city can do what it needs to do. I mean, you're talking about people being displaced, since the early part of the last century. That's 100 years. We're acting like we're just now interacting with black folks. We have been interacting with black folks, mishandling black folks, their educational affairs, trying to close their schools, closing down their businesses, redlining. And it's time for us to call it and change it,
Right.
so that we can be a true national leader in a city that truly celebrates its pluralism,
Right.
and its diversity.
When I think of economic, the subtitle is economic disenfranchisement. All I'm saying is that black people want a fair share of the economic situation,
Right.
and they're not getting it.
And we don't want a handout. We just want a fair
and they're
share.
being disenfranchised.
Yes.
I mean, if 20% of the white people who were involved in hiring people refuse to hire black people,
And we know this is this happens.
and and I challenge any University of Wisconsin grad student or the major newspaper or the television stations. You conduct your own affirmative action study. Tell me how many blacks are employed as managers, supervisors, presidents in these 100 companies. How many blacks are on the board? And
Then draw your own conclusions from that.
I bet you're probably talking of no more than 2 or 3 blacks out of 100 being presidents. And it may not even be that. And so it's so shockingly bad. And then I'll hear people say, "It's good here."
Well, it is for some people.
For some people, yeah. And when people ask me, they want me,
It's good for Tyler.
Yeah, they want to say, white people want me to say, "It's good here." A friend of mine told me once. He said, "Harris, I came here from Columbus, Ohio," and he said, "I got to tell you, this is a beautiful city. These 4 lakes, the hills." He said, "This is one of the most beautiful racist cities I've ever seen in my life." So it's beautiful and racist.
It's racist, definitely.
And so that kind of sums it up. It's an extremely racist community. And what makes it so bad? It's not the entire community.
It's just pockets of it.
That small 10 or 15%.
Dr. Harris, can we have you come back sometime and just talk about other memories of South Madison? Because one, I want it recorded. That's really the purpose of it.
Sure,
I love talking to you, but
Thanks.
I think your insight and your wisdom, I'm impressed, and I respect the fact that you're still angry, that you could just ride off into the sunset with your PhD and the things you've invested in. But the fact that you're still speaking up on these issues, and you have for as long as I've known you. When you come back, I'd love to talk about the South Madison Neighborhood Center, your mom's role in starting it. It's now known as the Boys and Girls Club, but I want to talk about that history. Sure. And listen, you all, my guest has been a role model, a father in our community, a husband, a dad, a deacon at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where his dad was a deacon years ago. He's an author. He's an advocate. He's still angry and black, and I love that. He's also a fraternity brother. He's also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I want to have him back on this show just to talk some more, because we need to be able to listen to our elders, and we need to understand our history and understand that his generation and those before him fought for economic opportunities in Madison, and I will be damned if we don't get a chance to get our slice of that pie in this community. So for folks who don't think that it's bad and don't think that we have any issues, just get out of my way, because part of what I've got to do to take up the baton from you and your generation, Dr. Harris, is to make sure that we don't slide even further to the back of the pack. You all have worked too hard for us to not run and make this city equitable for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. G, for inviting me, and I would be more than happy to come back. I wanted to say one final thing.
Sure.
And when I wrote this book, I didn't have you in mind when I was saying one of the things that we need to do is to have studies and sessions dealing with racism. And so my wife heard you on Channel 3, I believe it was.
Oh, sure.
And you were talking about how you said, yes, I'm angry, and
sure
it's
did.
justified. And my wife said, go, Alex. And then I read an article in the paper. I think I saw you and your wife and someone else you were interviewed, and you were angry. And the thing that caught my eye, as I told Maxine, was that the anger that you talk about was justifiable.
Yes.
And so I want to say this, and I've had a chance to visit the programs.
You came to our Justified Anger, our history class, and actually presented. Yes, sir.
Yes. Now this is, I think, the third year.
We're in our fourth year now.
year.
We've now taken 900 people through it.
And I want to commend you for that. And I
Thank
just
you,
want
Dr.
to say
Harris.
this. I think you'll start again next Black History Month in
2020.
2020.
Yes. We'll do some follow-up sessions this summer and fall, but we start the next full
Sign
cohort.
up for it. It's great. The thing, when I told my wife, I said, I said, Maxine, what I really liked was the enthusiasm that I saw of those white students that in your or participants who were
Right. Half of them are 55 and older.
Yeah, and so I said and she said that's our future. So I want to commend you for
Thank you,
that,
Dr.
and you
Harris.
did a tremendous job. Keep it up, and you have a right to be, like she would say, you have a right to be angry.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Hey, this is Dr. Alex G. This has been another great episode. I told you, another great episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. So, hey, thank you for your support. Continue to have your friends subscribe. You subscribe. Don't just bootleg. Don't just listen to me and not subscribe. Subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Tweet about it. Retweet about it. Post it on Facebook. Tell people what you're learning. You know someone who needs to hear this incredible storyteller, Dr. Richard Harris, talk about his experiences being born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin, and raising his children here. So thank you for your support, and I look forward to being with you again soon with our next episode. I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast. My podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.